Good morning, Stagecraft. Welcome. So this is our online version of Stagecraft. For today's notes, I want you to grab your notes. We're going to be continuing on your Techniques Test number 1 review. So you want these notes. We have already gone through on here all the way down to here. We've gone through two-dimensional scenery, framed and unframed, drops, drapes, flats, hard-covered flats, soft-covered flats. I want you to be reviewing all of your notes on that. We've started in three-dimensional scenery with weight-bearing. We've gone through rigid platforms. We've gone through ramps. And we're on wagons. So today's video is on wagons. Okay, so the basic construction techniques that you need to know for wagons in Stagecraft is that wagons are essentially the same structure, same construction techniques as platforms. So platform construction, 2x4 frames for the most part. I mostly use white pine unless it's a very heavy, heavy use platform. Then I might use Douglas fir. 2x4s. White pine on edge to make the frame for the platform, and then 3/4 inch plywood skin for the lid. Legging for platforms with 2x4s also, and you should have in your notes also, and I'll just read from this just as a reminder on construction for platforms: 2x4 frame, joists, so that's interior framing pieces every 2 feet, and a 3/4 inch plywood lid. Let's skip down to wagons then. Basic rigid platform construction with casters attached, and it says here directly to the frame. So let me grab a caster. All right. 2 kinds of casters you may remember: rigid caster and swivel caster. The different kinds of casters are important to know when to use which if you're going to be building a wagon. Let's say you need to build a wagon that simply moves in one direction, right? So it just comes on stage or off stage or 2 directions, just like this. If this is a 4x8 platform, 4 foot by 8 foot platform, we would want to use rigid casters, right? So we put rigid casters on the corners. Actually, if this is a 4x8, we should have probably 8. Like so. So casters, rigid casters, because all it has to do is roll in one direction back and forth. Okay, that's the simplest kind. If, however, we need to be able to steer this platform, so we have a platform and it needs to come in to a place, or it needs to come around over here like so. If we need to be able to steer it, kind of like a shopping cart, and you want to think of it, I recommend thinking of it like a shopping cart. How would you put the casters? What type of casters would you use? I just dropped my 2x4 right on my foot. But I have, no, okay. I don't have my steel toe shoes on today, so that was a wasteless effort there. So just ignore that. But steel toe shoes, handy for this kind of environment. Okay, what kind of casters would you use? A lot of people would say you need to use swivel casters all the way around, but it's actually best to do this. This will be my symbol for swivel caster, and rigid caster rigid caster, like so. That way it steers from one end like a shopping cart. That makes it much easier to steer and maneuver as a wagon as it's moving around. So rigid casters on one end, swivel casters on the other. Makes it much easier to steer and move for a platform that needs to move like so. My eraser. Oh, here it is. Okay. So on the maneuverable platform, a combination of both rigid and swivel casters. Swivel on one end, rigid on the other. Okay. For a platform that is what we call a jackknife, that is, it has one swivel point and it swings in from one swivel point. What type of casters would we use here? A lot of people say, well, it needs to move in a curving direction, so it would make sense to use swivel casters. That would be wrong. Need to use rigid casters. And here's how you do it. Here's the method for setting up casters on a platform like this, what we call a jackknife. Okay? If this needs to move from this position into this position, right? Like that curving. What we need to do is measure from here. We'll take a string, right? And mark like the radius of a circle. Like this. Concentric rings, if you can imagine. And then on our platform, put rigid casters here. So in line with these arcs. I don't know if this is clear in the video, if you can see. But the basic point is this caster over here, I'll use a different color to indicate which direction the arrows are pointing. How about red? This caster is pointing in this direction. This caster is pointing in this direction. Like so. The casters mounted on the platform in that position, rigid casters, will allow this to have one rigid swivel point so it can swing in and swing back just in that pattern. So rigid casters for the jackknife platform. Okay? And the same rule applies for a revolve, what we call a revolving platform. I'm just going to draw it as a square. Sometimes revolving platforms are round, sometimes they're square. I've seen them as triangles, but the same rule applies for all of them. A revolving platform will have a rotate point in the middle of it, right? And it spins in a circle like so, a revolving platform. Again, you might be persuaded that the swivel caster is appropriate because it's moving in a round direction, swivel, but that would be wrong. Again, same principle as the jackknife, you want to use rigid casters for this construction. And what you do is you mark from the center, right? And how I do this is I kind of make radiating lines, straight lines coming out from the center there. And then when I mount the casters, I will put them perpendicular to these lines, right? So a caster here in this corner, here, 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 like so. Like that. So that these casters are all pointing in the direction of the rotation. Like so. And that will allow that platform to rotate in a circle. So on your note page, again it says revolves and jackknife wagons. Use rigid casters placed in line with concentric circles from the pivot point. That's what that means. Let me grab my textbook real quick and I'll show you the picture of basically what I've just drawn here. Okay, so basically this is figure 11.56, and they've essentially shown you exactly what I've drawn here. So that is the most important things to know about building wagons. Casters, and they need to be these heavy-duty casters, furniture casters. These little guys, not sufficient for building wagons, weight-bearing platforms. The book in your chapter will also mention a couple other types of casters, like an air caster. Air casters, which we don't actually have any at Howard Payne at the moment, but allows the platform to sit on a cushion of air. It requires an air compressor. So it sits on a cushion of air and it can move around kind of like a hockey puck on an air hockey table. That's the essence of the idea there. Okay, yeah, so this is wagon construction. And again, to note that casters, when they're mounted to a wagon, if this is the frame, right, casters need to be mounted to the frame. And there's a couple of tricky cases in this situation because the frame is what supports the weight on a platform. The weight is supported by the frame, not the lid. Right? So you need to attach it to the frame. How we do this is if I need a caster in here, if this is the frame, I would add another frame in like so on the inside, right? And that would be where I would attach, should be attaching my casters, like so. All right. Thanks for watching this video on wagon construction. Be sure to log in. The next video is going to be on stairs. And just buckle up because there's math involved. So we're going to get into stairs in the next video. All right. Thank you.